Good day and welcome to this fourth video in this first tutorial to help you get started with Juno Cassandra. So in this video, part 4, we are going to specifically talk about the input and the committed treatments files. Just some prerequisites for part 4. We presume that thus far you have followed along with the preceding videos, part 1, overview and workbench, part 2, domain model setup file, part 3, project setup file. And I'll put a link to those videos in the description box below. Now, of course, if you have followed along with those 3 videos, you should already be up and running with Juno Cassandra. It should be installed on your computer and you should be able to run a model with Juno Cassandra. So if we just go over the pieces of the puzzle for running Juno Cassandra again, we have explained already in previous videos all of these 8 key components. In the first part of this tutorial, we spoke about everything up to the model configuration. Then in part 2, we spoke about the domain model setup file. In part 3, the project setup file. And in this last video of this tutorial, we are going to look at the model input file and the committed treatments file. So to start off with the model input file, I'm first going to go back to the domain model setup file and look at the setup where we define the input columns that the model expects from the input file. So here I'm back in my work folder for this tutorial, and if I go into the inputs file and I go to my domain model, this is what we discussed in the part 2 video. If I go and just open this file and I go down here to input headers, then you'll see in this column B, these are all the names of the input columns that I expect in my input file. So I'm going to keep this file open and then I'm going to navigate back to my input folder and go and open my input file that you should also have for this tutorial. So here in my input file, I've got my demo input set, and if I click on that file, then you can see this is where my demo input set file sits that we've been using so far in this tutorial. And all I'm going to do is to just take all of the headers that you see here, and I'll take the first row with it. I'm going to copy it, and then I'm going to go back to my domain model setup file, and I'm just going to transpose paste it here, so that just shows to you that I actually have each one of these. For example, there you can see I've got a column file segment name, and that column I can find there. Then I've got one called file underscore section ID, and that I can find there. So remember, these are the column headers I've just copied from my input file with their example values. Now it's not a problem if you have more columns in your input file than you have defined here in your model setup. So you could have extra columns, but you cannot have fewer columns. So each one of these columns that you see here in the domain model configuration has to be provided in the input file. Otherwise, Cassandra will not run the model and it will tell you about that problem. Okay, but you can add other columns with other names. So you could have, for example, my column in here, ABC, and so forth. And this could all be in your input file, and Cassandra will not have a problem with that as long as you have all of these columns present, and presume that the names are always case sensitive. All right, so that's basically all you need to know about the input file. Very important is that you can see when you define the input file in your model setup file, you have to provide a data type. So whether it's a text or a number field, and you have to ensure that there are no missing or empty values in your input file. We don't do checking for missing values when the model runs. We presume that you've done a proper preparation and pre-processing of your input file so that there are no numeric columns, for example, which have empty values or flag that says no data or something like that. Because when Cassandra tries to convert a column to a number, and there is a text value in there saying no data, or if it's an empty value, then an error will occur right at the start of the model. So we have relegated all of the pre-processing steps outside Cassandra so that Cassandra can run as fast as possible. But what that means is that you have to take full responsibility for making sure that your input file is properly prepared and checked before you submit it to Cassandra. Okay, so I'm going to just close this file because I don't want to save this pasting that I've done here. I won't save it. And the other thing that I just want to do is I'll close my input file here as well. I just want to go back again to my workbench file and show you that my input file here is called demo input set, demo_input_set.csv. And that file, just to go back again to what we explained in part 1, in my workbench file, if I go down here to the workbench folder sheet, you can see my input file is described right there, and that is the name of the input file, and I presume that that is sitting in the input subfolder, which is this folder right over here that you can see. And basically, if I just do that, then you can see demo input set is the file that I have specified. Now, as I mentioned in an earlier video, that this is the advantage of your workbench, that if you want to switch, if you have, for example, 2 input sets that represent 2 scenarios, or maybe one is a small sample set that you want to just use to test your model before you run it on a very big input set, then you could have more than one input set here. One could be a subset of the other one, and you can just change the name in here, save your workbench, and then when you set your workbench in Cassandra, automatically it will register that you have switched your input file around. Okay, so I'll just close this file again without saving it. And so now we can go to the next element, which is our committed treatments input set. So I'll open this file. It's also just a CSV file, and for this example we have just given you 3 example committed treatments. So before I start talking about this, I'm going to head over to the documentation website, and I will just show you what documentation there is regarding the preparation of your committed treatment set. So here I am on the Juno Cassandra documentation website. There's a link to this site in the description box below. And to get to committed treatments information, I'm going to go to configuration, and I will go to, on the side here, committed treatments. And here I'll find the information I need about committed treatments. Another way to get to it, or to any topic really in the documentation, is there's a really good search function here. So I can just click in there and put in committed, and you'll see it gives me everywhere where I find something on it. And this top one, if I click on that, it takes me to the page that I had earlier. So the elements that I'm going to show you just now in the committed treatments file are all explained in here. And what we also explain in the help documentation is that these columns here are mandatory columns. You have to have these column names, presume again case sensitive, in your committed treatments file. And here you can see I've shown those mandatory columns in blue. But you can also have other columns in your committed treatments file, perhaps just to make it a bit clearer for you where the committed treatments are sitting, etc. And that's not a problem. So you could have additional columns in there. That's all good, as long as you have these mandatory columns in your committed treatments file. So I'm not going to discuss all of these elements in detail. You could just go and read through this documentation, but I want to say something about cost calculation. If you look at the committed treatments file, you'll see that there is no cost in here. We don't ask you what is the cost of your committed treatment. Instead, we ask you for a treatment quantity. The reason for doing that is very often your committed treatments are calculated maybe not purely based on area and unit rate, but maybe for a committed treatment you've already done a more detailed assessment, and so you have a certain cost that you want to apply to that committed treatment, which is not completely congruent with your unit rate that you've given in your model definition. Now, if you put a cost for your committed treatment, and that means that the effective unit rate for that committed treatment may be different from what's in your deterioration model setup file, then when you do checks on the quantity of treatment versus the cost, you are going to find some discrepancies because of this. And for that reason, we force you in the committed treatments to describe for each committed treatment not the cost, but the treatment quantity, which will give you the same cost if you apply the specified unit rate from the deterioration model setup file. In this way, we ensure that there's always congruency between what the model outputs and the actual cost compared to the treatment rates. So if you have done a committed treatment assessment and you have a cost which is not completely based on the unit rate in your model, then you just have to calculate a dummy treatment quantity and put it in this column for treatment quantity, so that the cost that you actually calculate for the committed treatment will match the unit rate exactly. So there will be complete congruency between the cost for the committed treatment and the unit rate and the quantity. Okay, so that's just something that we've learned the hard way, that you can get discrepancies between your committed treatment cost and the unit rates if you are putting in a pre-calculated cost which don't use exactly the same unit rate as you have in your model. So if you don't quite understand what I've tried to explain now, please just read through this help documentation on cost calculation. You'll also see that we ask you for an element index here. Now, very often you don't have an element index because you have got your committed treatments from some other asset management piece of your asset management puzzle, and you don't actually know what the element index is. So there is a discussion about element indexes in here as well. We do have a tool in Juno Cassandra to help you find the element indexes for each of your committed treatments. So just go and have a look at the help documentation here, and that will help you understand that. You have to make absolutely sure, of course, that your element indexes are correct and that they align with your model input file. And always note that your element indexes in Juno Cassandra are zero based, meaning the first row in the input set is element index 0. And the last row will then be the number of elements minus 1. Okay, so it's not a 1-based indexing system, it's a 0-based indexing system. So if I go back to our committed treatments, then you'll see here in the tutorial committed treatments data, you'll see these are basically the mandatory columns. I'll just color them blue like that. Just make this a bit tidier. Of course, this is a CSV file, so any formatting that you put in here will be lost when you save it. So I'm just doing this for the sake of making it clearer. And so these are my mandatory columns. And here I've got some additional columns, and this I can just color in a different color to indicate that this is just extra information, and this is actually what I need. So if this is my CSV file that I submit to Juno Cassandra, then it is basically going to just ignore these columns and just read these columns over here. Okay, so I'll close this file and I'll just go and quickly run Juno Cassandra and point out a few things to you. So here I've got Juno Cassandra open. I'm going to select my workbench file. Again, I go to my tutorial, into my Cassandra work folder. That's where I find my workbench. I read that and I can see here where my committed treatments file has been read. Again, that is also specified in the workbench file. And if I go and run a model now, I'll just run the forecast, which runs very quickly. I'll take this sound off. Then you will see that it will inform me here that it has reduced the budget for 3 committed treatments. Similarly, it does the same if I run a benefit cost analysis model. Over there, it's telling me reducing budget for 3 committed treatments. So it will, right up front, when the model starts, it will reduce the budget in each period if there's committed treatments in that period, so that the triggered treatments can just be placed in the balance of the remaining budget. So I'll cancel this model run. So that's it for this last video in this first tutorial in getting started with Juno Cassandra. Thanks for watching.